but I'll pop this screen up, and I hope it doesn't seem too formal to have this here, because I want to emphasize that this is definitely an informal style of event. People should really feel free to ask any questions they want of the panel. We're here so that some of the junior faculty have a chance to learn and appreciate the perspectives of some of the senior folks in our area, thermal transport, that are willing to offer their perspectives. And so with that, I'm excited to welcome folks to the Thermal Transport Cafe panel discussion. The topic of this discussion is going back to normal, and what have we learned? And so that's sort of the prompt for this discussion today. And joining us are panelists Amy Betz from Kansas State. She's an associate professor there, as well as the assistant dean for retention, diversity, and inclusion. We also have Andrei Fedorov from Georgia Tech joining us. He's a full professor there, as well as the associate chair for graduate studies. We have Nenad Miljkovic from UIUC, is an associate professor working there, as well as Laura Schaefer from Rice University, a full professor at Rice, as well as our mechanical engineering department chair. So thanks everyone for joining us. We appreciate your time. I'll stop sharing my screen so that we can kind of look at each other for this discussion. And maybe I will kick off the discussion with a question of my own to the panelists that kind of challenges the main prompt, which is getting back to normal. So would you all say that we are kind of in a state of getting back to normal? And let me put this in the context of my parents, I just found out, are totally fine, but got COVID and tested positive this morning. So it's still a very active thing with the pandemic. So I was hoping to hear your opinions on whether getting back to normal is really the right mindset.
First of all, sorry about your parents. I'm glad they're fine. But yeah, I think that's a good question. I don't know if anyone else wants to go first, but okay, Amy?
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of chime in here. I think it is, as much as we don't want it to be, COVID is really still an aspect of our lives. And one population I find, it's so interesting to see how different undergraduate students and graduate students and the policies we have and sort of the pressure they're under, how they respond to this, right? Undergraduate students, you know, we're very flexible, at least at Kansas State, I think in most other universities, of, you know, letting them quarantine. We've pivoted classes online. For my graduate students, and I see for other graduate students, even the idea of, yeah, even if it's a mild case, being sick for 2 weeks, being out of the lab for 2 weeks, this is, especially if they've lost experimental time from COVID already and they're trying to graduate, this is just like not okay for them, right? And I think it's really made us rethink our graduate students, the kind of pressure they're under, the time-sensitive pressure they're under, what we do, right? It's always been a big, do you have sick leave in your lab? Do you have paid sick leave? And kind of thinking about this, but even trying to be very cautious and understanding that graduate students are just not in the same position as others are.
I would agree with that entirely. I think graduate students have always been a sort of special case. I think postdocs even more so, but graduate students, there are more of them, right? So even more than that. In that it's kind of a follow-on effect, right? You have a grant that you get from NSF, NIH, you know, DOD, wherever. There's no sick leave built into that grant, built into when you're writing your annual report, or, you know, with DOD, you have all your, you know, go, no-go points and milestones and things like that. And so the professor, I think, feels pressure, especially when you're talking about junior faculty who aren't tenured yet. They want to be understanding to their graduate students, but they also have pressure on them. And so I think it's going to take a little bit longer until we can call this normal, both with the health pressure and with the psychological pressure, right? We're seeing a lot more mental health issues coming up with graduate students as well. And that's something too that I think a lot of universities aren't well suited to address. We've got great resources in place for our undergraduates. For our graduate students, they're a little bit more iffy, unfortunately. We do what we can, but they're more iffy.
I guess we go kind of whatever line as zigzag. I probably want to say something. I'm not sure I have an answer to this question. I think this is a loaded question, normal, what's normal. I could provide some observation from personal experience as a faculty member, and also from kind of looking from maybe administration perspective, being kind of seeing broader what happens in the department. here's my view of the new normal, and it's probably going to be very grim. I'm not sure if it's everyone shares. I could tell you first from another faculty member, as administrator, maybe kind of a faculty member and administrator, someone who collaborates with a lot of people from different schools, including my department. The very new normal is, I realize that many of our faculty don't want to be at the university. So the COVID, I think, made about 80% of our faculty never show up except come in and teach the class. Not only that, they also engage in interaction with their students through email so happily, so proficiently, that they never be shaken from this equilibrium. And I'm kind of doing the route. I'm sitting in this big building, whatever it is, loud building, 3 floors. And I could say at any moment, any day, I probably see no more than 2 people from where I would expect probably around 40 people occupied. So that's one new normal, and I don't think it will change. That's my view. It's disappointing for me, but I think our faculty seems to be don't want to come to work. That's my first new normal. The second observation from new normal that I see how it will change. I think this is more of I don't know if it's COVID related or something, and because of this forced distancing that happened for 2 years or something, I think some of our both students and colleagues just kind of realized that they enjoy home much more than any other social venue. It's just more probably suited for them. Literally, this has nothing to do with the pandemics or anything. It's a better fit for them mentally. And I think that led to substantial change in the way graduate students, especially this is impact on graduate students, because faculty are removed. Maybe for junior faculty, there is a pressure to, I don't know, whatever they are, those pressures. I already forgot what those pressures were. But for graduate students, what I think they realize, I could see even among my own graduate students, they come into the lab just to do the experiment, whatever they need to do experimental work, whatever it is, just enough, and they're anxious to come back to their bedrooms, so to speak. And so what it does, there is no problem with this. It actually makes many of them are extremely efficient. Extremely, they come in super focused, come in, do their work, and then run back to their homes. But what it does, it removes what actually the essence of technical work. Many of the ideas and critical learning happens when people really hang out in the lab, literally. They don't work necessarily all the time, but they hang out in the lab. A lot of this lateral peer-to-peer learning happens through this interaction. I see this completely gone. It's just gone. It's not there, and it's not about the efficiency. Students are efficient. They still try to graduate, with all the mental health challenges. But the fabric of what research is, in a way, people drive the process, at least in the group like what we do, very critical, it's gone. So this is the second new normal. The third new normal that I realized, and I think maybe it came with this forced practice of online learning or teaching, some of our faculty were forced to develop digital proficiency. So they developed these materials, new materials. And some of this extremely high quality, literally very high quality. And it's very helpful to some of the students. So that's the second aspect. But also what we realize, what I see that, and also show that the presence of many of our colleagues in the classroom is not needed. Literally, all they are the narrator of the materials that they may actually very well prepare through digital media, and the student would consume it at their own time, at their own pace, usually twice, 3 times, 4 times faster than as they run through those, Zoom videos and so on. Which tells me one thing, that actually many of our colleagues also start running their own class instruction in the same mode as it was remote instruction. Literally, they come in and run remote lectures in the class. So their presence there really not needed. And actually students, many of them, don't even miss that. I think it may be showing 2 things. There is an important aspect of any academics is to be a motivator. It's a many different level of engagement. And this kind of is gone. I think the faculty is just They just come in, deliver their stuff, and whether it's a new reality or old reality, and the digital media allow us now to exploit this new reality to the extreme. But these are three observations that I see. Unfortunately, they're all very grim.
Let me redirect then, based on the last observation, and send it to Nenad, but I kind of want to then redirect thinking about what you just mentioned, which is that a lot of the folks will be able to just use recorded lecture. So are we kind of getting rid of our own jobs? And Nenad, maybe what are your thoughts on that as just a quick follow-up?
Yeah, I mean, I record my lectures, I put them online, and I've actually been a little disappointed with students. I usually get like half of my students, 75 students will show up. So like 30, 35 will show up to class, and the other half will just sit home and watch lectures. And I mean, my issue is I don't have enough data. I only started putting up videos during the pandemic because I was forced to, and I wanted to make it open. And I felt I wanted to keep it going moving forward. So I don't know what would have happened before the pandemic, but that's definitely a trend that I see, which I think is a little, disturbing. I would like to have students more in class, attending, engaging. So I agree with Andrei there as well, definitely. And I also, just to comment on Andrei's first new normal, I definitely agree. During the pandemic, our lab is heavily experimental, and there's a few things that we can't leave, right? Like long-term tests. And I was routinely coming in, and in some sense I was lucky because my wife was considered an essential worker. So I could still have daycare for my kids. A lot of daycares were closed except for essential workers. And that allowed me to come in. And what I realized is pretty much myself and like one other faculty were the only faculty in the building. Many faculty just they didn't come back, they don't come in. And in one sense, it's bad. It drives collaboration down, but in another sense, I feel like it's opened up opportunities for faculty who are eager because companies still want to fund projects. I feel like it's been good for faculty that are still engaged, still coming in, still advising students. So I would say to the young faculty, take advantage of that, right? Don't sit at home and hang out in your bedroom and do Zoom calls. Come in, do experiments, engage, talk to people. Be safe, of course.
So maybe thinking about what you just said, Nenad, about kind of coming in person, making the rounds, shaking hands and all that stuff. And then even thinking back to what Laura mentioned in the chat, which is about teaching. Does the method of presentation create an environment that's exclusionary to students from non-traditional backgrounds? So I would like to hear maybe from Amy and Laura and Andrei then about, does the method of online teaching somehow impact students from non-traditional backgrounds? And does the suggestion by Nenad to kind of go around and knock on doors and shake hands also have any impact on young professors from non-traditional backgrounds?
Huge. I could tell you, huge impact. I know how you guys teach. I usually teach by looking at eyes of the student. That's really what does it for me. And literally, who actually usually needs that most? Not the smartest cookie who already figure all it out. Those the smartest cookie, they don't need us. These are other students who may just kind of at the grasp, lost, walking through. You can't replicate this with not only just Zoom or remotely, but even if we run all of these wonderful videos that we can produce and it's really high quality done, you cannot do that. I'm going to share with you all guys a link. I think it's like a little clip that I use. I also teach kind of this course, teaching practicum, from Richard Feynman, when he was kind of reflecting on how do you teach people generally. And he was a remarkable teacher. So I think when you get a second, it's like a 5-minute clip, but I think it really sums up this essence, what the classroom does for people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, how they approach. And if this does not come back, we pretty much screw them. That's all it is. That's my take on that.
And Amy, if you have some thoughts, and if you could also think about Jonathan's question about maybe how do we even approach solving the issue?
Yeah, so I actually, back in 2018, I moved to having fully hybrid classes. And so I taught thermodynamics in, there was a section where students could be all online. There was a section where you could register in person, but I actually also let, because in Kansas State is interesting, it actually, depending whether you were in state or out of state, one registration might've been cheaper for you. So I let students register for whichever one they wanted, but they could still fully participate in cross, right? So I had some students who were fully remote, some students who did fully in person, and some students who did a hybrid of each. And it was interesting. I learned a lot about who this helps and who it doesn't help, right? And I'll say one thing: to do a class fully remote, it really required, and this is something students didn't realize, and I did a lot of learning along with the students, right? Either, yes, like Andrei mentioned, there's the students that really, they can just watch the lecture and get it, right? For other students that really needed a lot of support, they really needed to be extremely disciplined. And what I actually ended up having to do is come up with actually like a learning agreement with each student. And I worked with each student to kind of come up with a schedule for when they were going to be doing their things, right? And this was actually, it was a lot more work than I had signed up to do, but this actually had like long-term, like positive consequences for these students, because they learned what worked best for them in terms of coming up with their schedule of how they were studying. And it put a lot of accountability on them and was ultimately very good for them. And then I learned a lot more about who really does need to be in person. And some people are really good at being able to reflect on their own when they don't get it and asking for help. And other people just don't know what they don't know, right? And kind of helping some of those students of like, no, I think you really need someone to be kind of looking at you to tell you. And it was really quite interesting. And then I think there even were some underrepresented students or students who struggled that actually did kind of benefit from the more online. Again, they needed kind of the learning agreement with it, but especially if you're very introverted, I had some students who are extremely, or even some autism spectrum students who actually benefited from this as well. So I think it is really interesting. I definitely see the online learning. We had this problem early on in the pandemic, especially if you're ADD or ADHD, coming up with sort of that schedule, having the extra mental load of creating a schedule for yourself is very difficult. And so I got permission to have viewing parties when we had fully online classes. So especially for our first year students, for like Calc 1, I had a small room where they still had to be spaced out and masked, but you could come and I would just sit there with the students and we'd all watch the Calc lecture together, because some students actually just needed that accountability of a person seeing them watching the lecture to actually sit and pay attention to the lecture. And I find this really fascinating, right? Again, we still have all these struggles, but we do see a lot more about, what are the things we could provide for different students. There was a second part to the question, Dan, and I totally forgot with what Jonathan said.
Yeah, just asked any thoughts on trying to, if this isn't a problem, how can we sort of get past or solve it? And I think you touched on that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, to clarify like a dilemma I'm seeing now, the class I'm teaching right now is hybrid, roughly half are coming in person, half are on Zoom. And that made a lot of sense when COVID had the huge spike early on in the semester. But now that COVID's mostly better, the ratio hasn't changed. And so my concern is it's mostly out of convenience and inertia and no longer out of actual like actual health concerns anymore. People just got used to it. But I agree with Andrei and others that having eye contact and in-person cues really enhances the teaching experience for the students and for me too. So I'm just trying to like get a sense of at what point do I not allow hybrid anymore? Or if universities require hybrid from now on, what do I do about that? It just kind of seems like a no-win situation in some ways.
See, I think it definitely varies from university to university, right? Because at Rice, within mechanical engineering, for example, we only have one professor who still has permission to teach his class online this semester, and that's not going to be happening next semester as well. That's going to be over. You have to be back in the classroom because and this was a provost level approved exception, right? So it wasn't just something even as a department chair I could say yes or no, because I do think it is, as Andrei said, it is easier just to sit at home, but that's also, for some people, like Amy said, that can help, for example, if you're very introverted or you're on the spectrum, perhaps it helps you process your information better. But always being in the home, I think, also allows for mental difficulties like mental illness or, socialization problems that are going to kind of build on themselves. It allows them to go unchecked, where people aren't keeping an eye on you. People don't know what's happening in your life. People aren't helping you to get the help that you need in that regard. And so even questions at office hours, but they are listening to the questions. It's not like the students are learning everything just from our giant fonts of knowledge, right? They learn from each other as well. They learn from the questions each other ask. And being in that environment when it's a purely online lecture, you don't get that interaction whatsoever. I mean, right now, I will say I have fewer students in class than I've had earlier in the semester. We had a big sporting/alumni event about a week and a half ago, and shockingly, COVID cases spiked across campus. But I'm also hearing from the students how frustrated they are about having to have this hybrid mode again. They really got used to being in the classroom and they missed that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And even what you said just now kind of reflected to me the composition of the panel discussion, people that are attending and not necessarily asking a lot of questions, but still learning. So I think that that's an important observation.
Yeah, and I see in the chat, like Melanie said some things that are relevant to that, Jeremy, other people as well.
So if people are not keeping an eye on the chat, I encourage you to open that up because there's some sidebar discussion going on there. With people saying, and especially maybe something people can comment if this is something that's been reflected in their experience. So Jeremy mentioned that at the beginning of the semester, you had 60% in-class attendance, and now it's down to less than 10%. Have people seen something like that when they've been in hybrid?
Just to give a little bit of context, I'm part of this pilot hybrid program, so they really encouraged us to do like a, fully hybrid live video capture with like live conferencing. So it makes it pretty much as easy to attend, maybe easier to attend online. Like the barrier to entry is like very low, and they have like this sophisticated microphone setup so you can hear the entire room. So it's a very immersive, it's a very good remote experience. But I guess what I've seen is that like I've really tried to tailor my teaching towards remote learning, and maybe too well, to the point that I see just a handful of students in the classroom when I'm teaching, and that's really, it's just kind of sad because like I'm really motivated by an audience, right? I like looking at the eyes of students, but when there's only like 5 students in there, and I'm working on problems, that really does not feel any different than just sitting, at home doing a lecture. So, I don't know. I think there's benefits to this, but I feel like I'm a much better teacher with an audience.
This is Srinivas. Maybe I can add my experience a little bit. Certainly, in-class teaching is the preferred mode. I don't think you'll ever get an argument about that. But remote teaching is not all bad. I think there are some positives you can get out of it that you can use to supplement in-class teaching. And let me give you some examples. Whether it was during or before COVID or after we were called back to do in-person classes at Georgia Tech, I used to post the lecture notes. And I started actually video recording of my lectures even before COVID. And these were to make it easier for them to digest. They were not hour-long things. They were just 5-minute modules. So if it was conduction, it would be just one boundary condition that there may be a module on, so that with the attention spans that they have these days, they can just pick that and they don't have to devote an entire hour to it. In addition to that, when I teach in person, I rarely actually put up the slides and then just read from them. If it's an hour-and-a-half long class, almost the first 45 to 50 minutes, I just stand in front of them and chit chat about a coffee mug or about a hydro flask and how the insulation works, with evacuated tubes and so on. I mean, every day the conversation starts with just a free-flowing conversation, which keeps them engaged. And then I recapped that information using the slides towards the end. And I don't post my lecture notes or the videos before the class is held, so that the students attend and they see the value in that conversation, which they will not see even in my modules. So these are some things that can be done even under this scenario. Plus, the other thing is, for every course starting with COVID, we have created Microsoft Teams groups of students. So for design projects and so on, it's actually been easy for students to meet within themselves and do the design projects without having to find a place to meet. They can meet at 2 o'clock in the morning or 11 or whenever they want to. So it facilitates that. And I'll say one more thing. The office hours that I hold, somehow personally, I've never found office hours to be all that helpful to the students, because no matter how many office hours you provide, somebody or the other has class at that time and they're out of luck if those are the times. So I make myself available on Teams to answer their questions whenever they want. Now, this is a lot of burden on me, but I'm available. I mean, basically 24/7, they'll send me a Teams message and I'll just quickly respond to them. And I also have those of my graduate students who are interested in teaching and enjoy interacting with students. So the student actually sends me, like in chat rooms and so on, the text messages and copies the 2 or 3 graduate students that are also involved in it. So one of us responds. And so that helps in supplementing the in-class stuff. So I think there are some positives to take from this too. It's not all doom and gloom. The personal interaction is great, but all of us know some colleagues who their personal interactions are just mind-numbing and sleep-inducing. So that by definition is not anything great. So I mean, if you want an in-class experience, then you better make that in-class experience fun and engaging and so on. So those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah, Amy has a follow-up.
Yeah, so one thing I just wanted to point out, so a lot of the interactions we talk about and the benefit that they have for our students and how we kind of replicate it, it kind of has a background in it is related to social comparison theory, right? And especially for students and junior faculty, right? You're currently immersed in like a new area and field, and right, we never get enough feedback, right, in terms of formal feedback and ways to like fully judge ourselves. So the way that we kind of develop our and evaluate our attitudes, our abilities, our traits, what we're doing is we look for subtle social cues around us and see things, right, that are happening around us. And this is how we can kind of develop and learn. And we realize a lot of this kind of happens naturally in terms of like, getting students to form study groups, getting junior faculty to collaborate. And now all of a sudden that's been pushed away. And so you can replace this virtually, but you have to be very thoughtful about how you do it virtually. And a lot of the things we talk about mental health is people can, again, when you kind of get to choose, right, instead of being sort of forced into seeing different things, when you get to choose, you can put in a lot of bias that can either feed a positive or a negative narrative about yourself. And then it can be very difficult to really have an accurate reflection and judgment of how you're doing and what you need to do and what you should be doing. And so I think, a lot of what Srinivas was talking about, right, you have to, again, if you're going to be in a virtual environment, you have to replicate some of this and you kind of have to control it a little bit too, right, in Microsoft Teams. And you also sometimes as an instructor have to provide more insight to students about what they really need to be doing, right? And so stuff that they might have automatically kind of seen and not even realized they were using their brains to do it. You have to tell them, right, how long should it take you to do this problem, right? We saw that a lot with like testing. Obviously, we had a lot of problem with cheating with testing in the virtual environment, but there was also a lot more anxiety with students, right? And I'll give you an example, right? I don't know if anybody's ever given an exam, right? And halfway through the exam, one student comes and turns in the exam, and all the students in the room just start writing a little faster, right? This is a prime example of social comparison theory, right? Is now all of a sudden, because one person's completed it, they all feel like they're behind, even though a second ago they didn't have any of those feelings, right? And so I always tell the students, I wait till the one student has left the room. I go, listen, we have no idea whether that person knew all the answers or half that exam is blank. Chill out, right? And so there are some things in person that were good and bad. But again, if you take this void away from people, you have to replace it. And one thing that we always really could replace it with, and we probably could even do more of in person, is making sure we're giving more feedback to students and meaningful feedback and really having that engagement with students.
And maybe even thinking about that in the context of what Dion asked, thinking back now to this online engagement in the classroom setting, how do we sort of think about ensuring or getting students to pay attention? And then even thinking about maybe something in addition to that, have you had any experience with some of these online software-based modes that sort of track students with a webcam? Any thoughts on that as well, in terms of making sure that they're either not cheating or paying attention or something like that? Maybe
I haven't had any experience with the webcams. I know that when we had to be fully online, that as you know, we weren't allowed to tell students that they had to turn their cameras on. You know, they might have a home situation where it wasn't good for them to turn their cameras on. But I tried to come up with in-class activities that would make them want to turn their camera on, right? Like we'd all give like thumbs up, thumbs down. I'd like say, you know, show me something like something that I think Srinivas mentioned earlier. Show me something that you have in your house, like right now, that's a good example of that's a good conductor, a good insulator, things like that. And so they turn their cameras on and then they leave their cameras on. And then when you actually can see them, even if they're just like a bunch of tiny little people on the screen, it's still better. Not to make people on this call right now feel bad who don't have their cameras on. It's still better than just like a picture or a name. You know, you can see, are they paying attention? Are they like answering email when they're supposed to be watching your lecture? You know, what's going on with that? So
maybe thinking also, Nenad, do you have any thoughts on this? Haven't heard from you in a moment here.
Yeah, maybe I'm answering too much email. I'm kidding. No, basically, I actually have no experience with the online platform, like the online quizzes. I've heard of it before through like the Mark Spector meetings, thermal meetings of people at Purdue using it and tracking people. I'm just trying to think, how did I give quizzes when it was COVID and it was online? Because I avoided that completely. I didn't have to use the software. But yeah, I've definitely heard of, you know, stories about students getting caught cheating and then they were saying they didn't cheat, and it just makes it hard. And yeah, I'm just hoping that the new normal is back in class, human interaction, and kind of moving away from online Zoom types of lectures.
So let me take a minute here to shift gears a little bit, since we had a lot of chances here to talk about some of the instruction and teaching aspects of our job. I'd certainly like to circle back and think more about funding and research, but right now in the interim, could I ask if you all have any thoughts on the evaluation of the junior faculty? So thinking that this is a group that's focused on junior faculty and giving us advice, has the bar shifted up or down, or has it really just remained the same in terms of how we're evaluated?
Yeah, maybe I could start on this one. And I won't comment on evaluation because I'm not senior enough to know even how to evaluate. So I think that'll be Andrei and Laura mainly, maybe Amy because she's a dean now. But basically, one thing that I found, having young kids and COVID, you know, even though we had help, I would find that senior faculty were not as sympathetic to what young faculty were going through. So like, especially if you have young kids, setting up meetings, you know, changing meetings, just assuming that you were available at all times. And yeah, that's one thing that, you know, as a senior faculty, usually if you have kids, they're like in high school or they could kind of entertain themselves. But when you have young children and they're doing Zoom lessons and they're, it just made life a lot harder for junior faculty. So I definitely sympathize, and I know many schools gave like COVID extensions. You could do a rollback, and I'm sure everybody here has had that option. So that is something that kind of came through to give you more time for a 10-year process. But yeah, I'd like to hear kind of from Laura and some of the more senior folks here what they think.
Andrei, if you want to go first, you can. I'll go first otherwise.
Well, I don't have because I don't do the evaluation. You have to do the evaluation of faculty based on the job. I'm privileged not to do it. I'm so glad. If they knew that I do the evaluation, they would hate my guts. I always avoid any jobs that involves evaluating of anyone else, because that's the best way to create a lot of good friends. But I could tell you one thing, acknowledging the fact, Nenad, what you said. I don't think junior faculty, or I would not call junior faculty, because all the faculty could have also young kids. Generally, the circumstance of having children who all of a sudden the entire infrastructure support a family that disappeared, I don't think that dawned on people. And it's not that they intentionally just ignored, yeah, we'll schedule it anytime. People just didn't comprehend that. Literally, I think it was the inability to comprehend that, and to comprehend the level of punishment, essentially, on so many different levels, folks experience. Literally, the only way, I probably would put myself in the same camp, being guilty by association, because I do have only middle school kids right now in the house. All others are college level and post-college. So I could say one thing, that the absence of, yes, daycare, and the fact that those children are literally all the time with you, around you, and you cannot ignore them literally. I think it just, I don't know, it's mentally destroyed folks. I've seen faculty that I would randomly run while walking, taking a walk, who just fall into a cry, literally just fall apart. This is, and if you think about this happens day after day, that kind of start giving you the sentiment for this. So I think it was not appreciated. I'm 100% sure across the board, people just do not have this relationship, and especially since you don't see it, right? Because everything was pushed outside. Everyone was sitting in their little boxes. No one had these things. And anyone you preach, oh yeah, I have this thing, you cannot relate this. It's like watching a movie, which is actually, from the 19th century. So I think that's a reality. That was there. The provisions have been made at Georgia Tech, probably Rice, everywhere, to give extra time and so on. Would it make life easier? I'm not sure. I'm literally, it's better than have nothing, but I think the damage has been done very long term. So recovery will be difficult. The impact will be felt. And it will remain to see how it will propagate to what you guys consider yourself junior, how you actually going to progress through, middle rank, senior people. How would that impact your longer term trajectory? Because we all know how those early years, they're very formative in many ways. The network I established, ways you establish yourself within the institution. What your leadership profile is, whatever this definition, leadership, not necessarily administrative leadership, but how you're going to be viewed by your peers as a person of what's your intellectual profile. That will be felt badly. That's my take on this. But I'm glad I never had to evaluate anyone, but because I would be at loss. I would be at loss, and I would probably just fall apart and start crying. That's I let Laura she had to do the real job.
Well, I'll try to be careful sometimes with what I'm saying, since I have two junior people on this call right now. But I will say, like, both at Rice and at my previous institution, I was on the school-wide, we have School of Engineering instead of college, but school-wide P&T committee. And what I saw, I have kids myself, right? And I actually did not get any parental leave when I had both of my children, because the way that the university was incorporated is each department was independent. And so it was so small, it didn't have to give parental leave. So things have changed a lot for the better. Over the time since I've had my kids, they started granting sabbatical delays and parental leave. You know, at my previous school, which I'm not naming, so I don't want to shame them all that much, so I'm sure most of you know what it is. And what I saw on the school-wide P&T committees are there were still people, when someone would come up because they'd taken a paternity leave or maternity leave and they delayed their tenure, there are people who were judging them as if they'd had a whole extra year. They weren't counting that time as, you know, it wasn't like a blank time for them. It's like, well, they haven't done enough for like tenure plus 1 year. They haven't done enough for tenure plus 1 year. And you would have to argue very vociferously against that point of view to say that, no, they have, you're not supposed to count that year. Let's look at what they've done. There are, you know, these delays. And there were other things like that too, right? Experimentalists who didn't get their equipment in on time. There are other reasons you could postpone. But one thing that I am seeing with this being across the board, that you can have this extra COVID year, are people are finally internalizing that this extra year doesn't mean you get an extra year worth of work that you're supposed to cram on top of what the expectations already are. That has changed very rapidly across the board. So that's a really good thing for junior faculty, that is no longer kind of like wink, wink extra year. It's, yes, this is actually an extra year, and we're still having the same, you know, for the 6-year tenure period, 6-year expectation over the 7-year period. So that's a positive, I would say. But I'd also say that Andrei is 100% right that this is hugely catastrophic for people who had young kids. Academia all along has not exactly been super family friendly. I mean, I recommend it for my, you know, graduate students, for my colleagues, because, you know, I was able to bring my baby into the office with me and like nurse her and then go teach and go back. And I couldn't do that if I was like ExxonMobil or something like that. But in terms of wanting to spend time with your kids, that corresponds very closely to when you're establishing yourself in your career, when you're trying to get your papers out, try to go to conferences. You know, thank goodness now conferences, that they're coming back again, have childcare associated with them. People are paying attention to that. But there have been these things historically, and it was just exacerbated during COVID. And what I also see is some colleagues, not the people I'm talking about on this call that are in my department, but some colleagues who have kids who talk about the extra burden they had during COVID. And then I also saw people who had older kids get resentful and angry about that, or who didn't have kids, saying, well, I've had to take on this extra service burden or this extra teaching burden in the department to accommodate the folks who have kids, and I resent those people. And we need to do better as a field to actually address that, to make sure we're not overburdening anybody, because the person who doesn't have kids might have elderly parents in a nursing home that they are worried about dying from COVID, right? All sorts of people have personal lives, and we like to pretend that we don't have personal lives in academia. And that's something for our own faculty's mental health needs to be addressed as well.
So maybe refocusing briefly, and especially thinking about sort of taking a step back from including kids in the equation, just across the board for anyone's scenario, and especially with some of the comments I'm seeing come in, you know, equipment delays, problems with supply chain issues. That applies to everyone, kids or no kids. So then could we just briefly refocus, due to COVID in general and all these constraints, has the bar moved, or is it just the extra year? And Laura, maybe you're saying the bar has fortunately stayed the same, or what's your thoughts there?
That's what I've been hearing. I mean, we haven't seen a whole lot of cases with that yet, right? Just, you know, basically a year's worth, but no one, there was no discussion of, oh, this person had an extra year. So happy about that.
There's one other aspect that I think should be emphasized. If you have hired a new faculty member during COVID and that person is starting during that time, it is hell for those people, because they just have no one to interact with, no one to just step over to the next office and find out, hey, how do you fill out this form? Or, you know, how do I check the students registered in my class? And, you know, simple things like that, where no amount of training or formal procedures can help. So all of us should take it upon ourselves, if we have new faculty who just joined within the past 2 years, just do a check with them every single week. I do this. I make it a point to go out for coffee or lunch or something and literally email at least one of our new faculty members almost every other day. And so you have to build some sense of community with them. Otherwise, half the people can't even recognize them if they see them in the hallway. And many of them are young people. And for one thing, they look like students. And then if you've never really tried to interact with them, you just don't know who they are. And that sense of community is so important in that first semester or the second semester, in addition to all the stuff I see on the chat about equipment delays, supply chain, and so on. Just that human interaction is so important. So if you have colleagues like that, please take extra steps to bring them into the fold.
Yeah, Amy?
Yeah, and I think it was also put in the chat, right, that we've had this loss of conferences. We've had some online conferences, but we know it's not the same. So as a junior faculty, or even I feel it as, you know, a mid-career faculty, we've really lost out on opportunity to promote our work. So if you've been lucky enough to even get, you know, good publications or have, you know, and that conference was really often for me, I think, a way to get some early results out there. So then when I did publish, people knew it was coming and getting my work cited. And I think we've really had a loss of that as well. And I don't know how, you know, what the long-term effects of this are going to be. So I think we also have to be very thoughtful as well, promoting our faculty's publications and making sure we're kind of sharing those. I think another thing that I have been experiencing a lot, right, especially because maybe there is like a little bit of a delay in some publications getting out. I feel like, and I'm doing it myself too, I'm finally having a push of publications out the door. With my own push of publications I'm trying to get out the door, I'm having just like a barrage of reviewer requests. I mean, it's always a lot, but I've never felt like so many in my inbox ever. And I'm very like, I just got to be like, nope. I'm like, if I've got 2 under review, I'll do 4 reviews, right? That's it, that I'm done. And then once I've picked those, I'm saying no to everybody. But I could sense as a junior faculty member, this might be even harder to kind of know how to balance this and what to say no to. But definitely you should also say no when you, yeah.
Don't say no to your department chair's requests, though, my 2 guys. Let's clarify that. I'm kidding. You can say no to me too.
And if you all haven't been looking at the chat, there's some great content in here to keep an eye on. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know we're a little bit under 10 minutes left. I saw one of the questions here from Mateo was regarding the incoming graduate students, the applicants and the students who have just been hiring since the start of the pandemic. Have you noticed any changes in what you might call like the quality of the students overall? And maybe if so, is there anything you've been doing to try to work around that?
I think
I'll make a quick comment and then I'll shut up. But I am in charge of graduate program at Georgia Tech, so I could give the answer from institutional perspective. I did not find anything pandemic related. As a matter of fact, we probably had during the pandemic 2 best classes of students. I mean, literally the quality, the motivation, the drive, all of those things. So I did not find that being the issue on the front end. We will see how they will perform in the program.
our biggest issue, and I'm hoping this is not going to be the case for the group coming in the fall, was the delay in visa processing for international students, and then the actual like entry procedures for students coming from international, COVID testing and the different vaccines and getting up to speed on that. And the fact that they were so disconnected from their family, like new graduate students from China could not go back and visit their family. They still can't go back and visit their family without risking, 3 months in quarantine or something like that. So that's been the bigger issue on the international side. Again, I'm hoping that is easier this fall.
Yeah, maybe I'll comment because I gotta head to class soon. But yeah, I agree with Andrei. I found out of the students that I've hired, they've been best quality I've had yet. the one thing that I have found, it's partly COVID conflated, but partly not. It's basically the kind of decoupling from China. And so we've definitely seen a cratering of really excellent applicants from China. And, we still get a lot of great ones from the other countries, India and Europe and domestic, but we've definitely lost a lot of talent from the China side. And so I know that you can't really blame that on COVID. There's other political reasons as well, but that's something to kind of keep an eye on.
And Patty mentions in the chat, which I think makes a lot of sense if people have been online, that incoming students may also not have a lot of experimental experience though. So is that something you've seen if you're running an experimentally focused lab?
For me, I haven't seen as much of this. For me, I'm an experimental lab, so when students come in, I kind of assume they know nothing anyways. It's rare to have a student come in and, they kind of hit the ground running. They need some time to learn. So maybe I put less emphasis on having them know much. But I would, to that comment, I would say I haven't really seen that.
We had one semester where we had to teach like welding and machining over Zoom that spring 2020. That was rough. But I think after that point, we've gotten back to doing the proper training, both for the curriculum and students, undergraduates being able to go back into labs by, I would say, spring 2021. So that's helped.
So I guess getting ready to wrap up here by the end of the hour, are there any sort of final thoughts you want to share that might be good advice for us that we haven't touched on yet? Maybe starting with Laura.
That's a lot of pressure. Gosh, I guess I would say part of it is looking forward to the future when the junior folks get tenure and move up to the associated full ranks and have more of an administrative say, is to remember these conversations, right? And to continue to advocate for people who want to balance personal life and academic life, and to keep pushing for an understanding that we want absolute excellence in the academy. Yes, that's absolutely correct. We don't want to compromise on that, but our timelines are not always the best for determining when that excellence is going to manifest itself or not, is what I would say.
Gotcha. Maybe Nenad?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. My advice for young faculty, and I got this comment a lot, it's like, hey, you have tenure now, why are you working so hard? And I thought the whole point was to get tenure and check out. And coming from Eastern Europe, I would always say, you never know when, bad things are coming. So in this case, I don't want to say spend all your time in the lab and doing work all the time. But also, you are young, you're energetic, push things now, because then you'll have that buffer, right? You'll have those papers in the pipeline, the money saved up to kind of account for these times. So that's my advice.
Thanks.
Hey, take care, everybody. I gotta head out. See you, everybody.
Maybe we could then hear from Andrei and then Amy to wrap up. Is that okay?
Absolutely. So I'll be quick. So I wish you all, mostly talking to younger people, but senior folks as well. Make the new normal be an old normal. You were still graduate students in old normal. There is an opportunity to go back. In literally, learning all the good new things, what Srinivas was bringing about, these 5 minute modules and so on. But literally, be present. That's to me, be present in the lives of your students, in your laboratories, in your academic environment, in your colleagues. Get back to this. That's what academia is. This is, and that comes with a personal commitment to show up. Yeah, that's all I have. And hey, have fun. Things will work out, and hey, be positive.
Yeah, my advice for junior faculty is the same advice I always have, right? Yeah, like what Andrei said, have fun. Really, see the amazing joy in this idea that you have such good ideas that people will pay you hundreds of thousands of dollars to explore these ideas. And that's just such an amazing gift, right? And when you really enjoy it and love it and don't get too caught up in, you know, the total number of dollars or the total number of publications. Just enjoy the ones you do. And obviously you're going to have to do stuff you don't always enjoy, but the more you can really find joy in the things you do, the easier it's going to be.
It makes a lot of sense.
I mean, that's part of why we keep working hard, like what Nenad said, right? Because we love this. This is the best job on earth, right? Why wouldn't you keep working at it? So
I really appreciate the perspectives from all of the panelists. I hope everyone will join me in thanking them again for their time. And thanks also to Matteo for continuing to organize this Thermal Transport Cafe. We look forward to the next event. Is that on the schedule yet, Matteo, or are we still waiting to announce?
Take your time. Another half an hour. I guess you will have to go somewhere else. I don't want to hold you hostage. But thank you very much again. I really appreciate and thank you for sharing your point of view. These are personal opinion, and I understand someone may not feel comfortable sharing, but that's why I appreciate it 10 times more. If the meeting is over, I want to share my experience with recording the lectures. I think it's the most embarrassing thing I've ever done. Recording lecture on camera and see myself and posting the lecture. I mean, I really don't want to watch those things anymore, right? And I understand when actors say they don't watch their movies, because I really hate my voice, I hate my face, I hate everything of what I say. And in the end, I finish spending more time editing the videos to cut the stupid things I said than to record the lecture itself. So I really wish those things were banned, or people never invented Zoom, although, I mean, obviously it's fun to meet with you guys.
It's even worse when your students inform you they watch your lectures at 1.5 or 2 times and they don't click the voice modulation button so that they listen to you, in fact, speak like a chipmunk squirrel.
yeah.
And, you know, really get enjoyment out of this.
Yeah, it's been terrible, but yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I find the transcripts are great for that, but they're not so great with thermodynamic terms. Like entropy comes out as so many different words in the transcript. It's ridiculous. So. All right, I'm going to take off now. I've got another meeting to go to.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
Sure.
Bye, everyone.